Right.
Did you listen to the talk?
Oh, the face separation?
Yeah.
No, I couldn't go. I'm doing a conference. Sorry. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes, nice to meet you. Thank you for
Great to
coming.
meet you. You get my angles on the screen right. Like squint everything. Okay. Yeah, I think
What's
that's
that tree behind you?
it's so big too. It's as tall as I am.
What is that? I'm a big plant person. I've never seen anything
Called
like
plastic. It's not real. But I do have, so I have the ZZ plant right next to it, and others. But yeah, that one I just found it online at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was like, yes, I want that.
it's funky. I like it. Hi, Dr. Stanley. Thank you for coming.
Oh, hi. Hey, Liz.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Fun to see you on this panel.
Yeah. Yuki, I just wanted to say thank you. Your questions are really good. I'm really excited to hear everybody else's answers to them. It's a nice change from, okay, describe chronologically how you got to where you are.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of writing Q&A questions. It's something I've learned in the last year. Yeah, especially since you kind of get to the meat of things that you're curious about rather than, like, I think spending time with the questions is pretty valuable. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. DeCooper.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Welcome. Or no, good morning.
Hi, Dr. Sokoloff.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you both. I'm Amanda.
Hey, Amanda, Dahlia.
I'm Liz.
Deborah.
Okay, so I think we'll wait for a few more minutes for our last panelist,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can get started. Are there any questions I can address before we begin?
No, I'm excited.
Okay, me too.
Me too.
And since we have a moment, can I just brag for a second? You said, like, what's your proudest accomplishment? This morning at the dog park, somebody told me that my puppy is a very good boy and everybody knows him and everybody talks about him. They're like, oh yeah, everybody in the neighborhood loves Typo.
That's amazing.
I was like, my work here on Earth is done. I'm pretty happy.
Did you say your dog's name is Typo?
Typo, yeah.
I love that.
My husband is a writer, so it's especially fun.
Hi, Dr. Depkar.
Hi, nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, you too.
Nice to meet you too. I'm Amanda.
Colleagues.
Okay, yeah, so Dr. Depkar, I just,
I think I accidentally did that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. I had just asked everyone if they had any last minute questions before we start, so I wanted to extend the same question to you as well.
No, I think we're good.
I realize I do have a quick question. Do you want us to mute ourselves while other people are talking, or do you want us to be more in dialogue as a group?
I would prefer dialogue, so maybe we can start with that, and then if, maybe a good problem would be it gets a little chaotic because there's so much dialogue, and then we can address it from there.
I might just mute on occasion anyways, because I tend to have a lot of background noise between a puppy and a
Too.
toddler.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And yes, for the audience, I'll also be monitoring the Q&A, so if you want to enter your own questions, please feel free to do that. So, and then the hop-in guidelines for participants are in the chat, so if you want to take a moment to look over those, and we'll get started. So thank you all so much for coming. I'm so excited to have these fantastic panelists here to share their experiences in STEM. And since we have a fairly large panel and we're limited on time, I'd like to let each panelist introduce themselves by telling us a little bit about the area of STEM that they now work in and share an influential experience, conversation, or series of events that led them to their current fields within STEM. So let's start with Liz Neely, who is the founder of Liminal Creations, a member of the AAAS Committee on Science and Technology Engagement with the Public, also known as COSTEP, and a lecturer at Yale University.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. I work in science communication, and this is not my area of training. I started off in marine biology and ecology, and I had my introduction to what I think of as the real world of where the science research meets power at a conference called CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. I was in my mid-20s, and I actually missed the key decision because I was lost in the bureaucracy as they were announcing things from stage. But I was just shell-shocked. I was so disappointed and angry that my proposal about deep sea corals had been voted down, that I really wanted to understand, how do decisions get made in the real world? What changes people's minds? How do they make decisions? How do they learn about science? And so that's what got me into this space.
Thank you so much. So let's go on with Dr. Dalia Sokolov, who is the staff director of the Research and Technology Subcommittee of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology.
Hello, everyone. So the path that I ended up pursuing after my PhD is one of science and technology policy. I started out that path as a AAAS fellow, if you're familiar with that program, and thought I was going to spend 1 year on the Hill, as we say in Washington, working in Congress as an S&T policy fellow. And here I am 17 years later, because kind of got drawn in. In terms of an influential conversation and what set me on this path, I had a PhD advisor who was very supportive of all of his students pursuing different kinds of opportunities. He and I like to get in, we were in Seattle, very far removed from Washington, D.C. politics, but he and I like to get into discussions about politics. I remember specifically, talking to him about the 2000 presidential election and how disappointed we both were in those results. And one of my classmates in graduate school came out to Washington, D.C., the other Washington, for a 3-month internship with the National Academies in science and technology policy. And that wasn't on my radar at all. But this classmate of mine, John, he came back to Seattle, and he was talking about it. He was really raving about his experience, and that really planted a seed for me. And again, I had an advisor who was so supportive of me and my fellow students in pursuing where our hearts were leading us. And so I was actually able to take a quarter off of my grad studies the following winter to come out to DC for that very same internship program. It's not called a fellowship, but it's the same program. And that's what started me on my path into policy.
Wow, thank you so much. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Deepna Devkar, who's the Vice President of Data Science and Engineering at CNN and leads the data intelligence team.
Hi, everyone. So nice to meet you all, although virtually. I'm Deepna, and I actually ended up in my field after getting a PhD by complete serendipity. So I had a PhD in computational neuroscience, and I had moved to New York City to pursue my postdoc at NYU at one of the mentors that I really, really valued. And he had moved there, and he encouraged me to move, and I'm so glad I did. But once I got there at NYU, some of you guys might be in the field of computational neuroscience. There's a really great program there. And I literally saw my academic heroes in their so-called established careers in their 50s, still looking for grants, still having to lay off postdocs because, you know, they couldn't secure a grant. I think at the time, maybe something like 9% of the grants were getting funded, which, you know, is, you need a lot of luck alongside good performance as well. So yeah, basically lots of like job insecurity started to creep in. I was like, if, you know, I had fallen in love with New York City. So I was like, if this is what true success looks like, you know, being at NYU in your established career and still having to face these challenges, then maybe I don't want this. Except I didn't have an answer as to what I wish I had a beautiful story like this, where, you know, I just kind of navigated into that. But it actually took a lot of, you know, soul searching, introspection, and then just, you know, figuring out what it is that I liked about academia that I could, you know, put out in the real world and have that be valued. So fortunately, data science was becoming a big thing at the time. There was a fellowship called Insight Data Science Fellowship. I'm sure if you guys are thinking about data science, you've probably heard about it. So applied for it. I already knew coding and, you know, computational modeling and all of that stuff. So I basically quickly picked up those skills, and then I got in. And then once I did my fellowship, a couple of weeks later, I had my first position as a data scientist. And then I sort of navigated up into management, and here I am in my current position 5 years later.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with the grant part of what you were saying. I had to apply to one last night, and I had the deadline wrong by a day. So that was very fun for everyone involved. Okay, well, thank you. Let's move on to Dr. Deborah Cooper. She is a 2014 California Council on State and Technology Policy Fellow, a principal consultant for the California State Senate Appropriations Committee, and a chief consultant for the California State Assembly Human Services Committee.
Good morning, everybody, or I guess depending on where you are, good morning, good afternoon. I'm excited to be on this panel. I'm sorry, I apologize. I have some of that background noise now. I got into science policy. You know, when I was in grad school, I was interested in doing something outside of academia. I think as Dr. Devkar was saying, I looked at my advisors, and while I was, you know, very proud about what they did and they were very accomplished, their life of chasing grants was just something that I knew that I didn't want to do professionally. And so I was looking at other options, whether science communication or science policy, and ended up on the science policy track. I applied for the California Council on Science and Technology Science Policy Fellowship. It's similar to the Congressional Fellowship with AAAS. And I did that with the intention of potentially staying in California for a year. 6+ years later, I'm still here. And so while my particular work right now is in the Human Services Committee, so I analyze all policy on human services that comes through the California legislature, it's not, my current position isn't directly related to science. It does come up from time to time, but that was my introduction. The fellowship program was my introduction into science policy. And I'm still involved with science policy writ large.
Yeah, one of my best friends just applied to CCST, so.
Best of luck.
Okay, so amazing. Finally, we have Dr. Amanda Stanley, Executive Director of Compass, or Compass, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, I'm sorry, which champions, connects, and supports diverse science leaders to improve the well-being of people and nature.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to be here. So my story is a lot like Liz's. I got into science with this goal of wanting to help save the world, as an environmentalist. And I thought, I don't really know how to deal with people, and so I'll just do science and get all the information and the data, and then other people can figure out what to do with it. And that's how change can happen, right? So I was quickly disabused of that and realized that even in science, and especially when you're trying to think about how do you apply science to actual real world problems, it's all about the people. And so it becomes about communicating, engaging, and connecting. And so at some point along the way, I made the transition from being a research scientist to being somebody who supports science. And I first got involved in philanthropy. So I was working for a charitable foundation that funded science in pursuit of conservation in Western North America. And there I learned a lot about what does it take to get science to where it needs to go, and how do you hold decision makers accountable when they say they're going to use best available science. And then at some point a few years back, I said, you know what, there's a difference between supporting the work and doing the work. And I joined this organization, which is one of my favorite grantees when I was a funder. And it's been a pleasure to lead Compass. And we're thinking about how do we support more scientists to be agents of change in the world? How do we help create the tables and spaces and conversations for science and decision makers and community leaders and industry and nonprofit groups to come together and co-create solutions to problems around climate change and biodiversity loss?
Okay, amazing, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of parallel motivations here. And so since this is the Women in STEM conference, I'd like to talk a little bit about mentorship. So personally, a big reason I was drawn to academia was because my undergraduate mentor completely changed the trajectory of my life by helping me gain an appreciation for science as well as the confidence to pursue it. And so I think that the mentorship aspect of a career is really important, but something we don't really get to hear much about beyond academia. So could you speak to a mentorship experience that you've had, or your perspective on what mentorship is like within your career field? And so now for the intro, I wanted to walk everyone through, but to facilitate a more organic conversation, let's try that people can address the question as they like.
Well, I'm happy to jump in, and then I'll turn it over. So there's no doubt that mentors are important, but I would just like to call attention to generally women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And so there's a real difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I'm seeing lots of heads nodding, right? So they share you. Sponsors have power and can use it on your behalf. And so there have been many mentors in my life who've been incredibly impactful for my personal growth as a leader. But for advancing in career, having sponsors, people who can make introductions for you, help you find funding, help you get a job, these are also incredibly important. So I want to introduce that. Both are really, really critical for our careers, and women tend not to have as many sponsors. So thinking about how you find those is really important.
Go ahead. I was going to say, yeah, everything that you said. The only thing that I would add is that, for me, oftentimes it's like, people try to say, how do I find a mentor? So in academia, it's sort of easy, I guess, or it's supposed to be easy, because when you choose your advisor and your advisor chooses you, they're supposed to be your mentor. Like, they sign up for that, right? I wasn't so fortunate in my graduate career to see that in my advisor. It's sort of like, happened that we ended up choosing the lab that I did, and he ended up choosing me. But then, like, as time went on, it was very clear that not only was he not a good mentor, but he was definitely not going to be a sponsor either. And so I had to seek that in my academic career. And I, was very fortunate. It was because of that mentor that I moved to New York City, which then ended up changing my life. but I think so it's not so clear cut how you define and find that in your academic career. And it's even harder once you've moved on, because you aren't sort of like paired with this person that automatically is supposed to do that for you, right? So I would say, like, in my career, there have been multiple mentors, and that doesn't mean that mentorship has to come from someone who's above you or ahead of you. It could be someone that reports into you. I think there's experiences in mentorship and in learning all around you. And I think it's like, you shouldn't go into it. I really poorly compare this with trying to, like in a dating life, right? Like, you don't just meet the person the first time and say, hey, are you going to be my mentor? Like, you just don't do that. So it needs to happen organically based on what it is that you're looking for. And it could come from several people.
Piggybacking off of what Dr. Devkar said, it definitely needs to happen organically. I've had a number of, been a part of an organization where they try to pair you up with a mentor, and almost every single time that that's happened, even though they try to, pick similar interests, it just never works. The one time I'd say that was an exception is that I was paired up with somebody who had already been mentoring me. So it, I guess in that case it worked, but we already had organically met and made that relationship. I think while I was in academia, a lot of my mentors that I had actually came from when I went to meetings. And so I would go to these national meetings. For me, the two big ones that I would always go to were Society for Neuroscience and Experimental Biology. And through it was often at the exploring careers outside of the academia sort of panels and symposia that I would just walk around, talk to people, and ended up making a number of mentors, just reaching out to those people after I left the meeting and then continuing to reach out. And I think that's the part that's really important, is not just the reaching out the one time, but the continual reaching out. And eventually, hopefully, it's a two-way street where, you're reaching out, but they're also reaching in and checking in on you. And I think it is important that you need both types of mentorship and sponsorship. Someone who, especially if you're trying to transition out of academia or into a different career, and you don't know too much about that, a mentor is both mentor and sponsor are really good in those situations to help you navigate that new industry, whatever it is. And let you know, because even when I was getting into science policy, I knew the idea of science policy, but what that actually meant on a day-to-day basis, I really didn't know. And it wasn't until I talked to other people who were in science policy that I had a better understanding of what that actually means as a career. But yeah, making those relationships organically is very important. And finding those people who will vouch for you and will bring you and show you and tell you about opportunities as they arise, and speak on your behalf when those opportunities arise is very important.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to speak in concrete terms about some decisions that I made that were really helpful to me. So before I founded Liminal, which is my current firm, I was the executive director of the Story Collider. So an performing arts nonprofit. I had never been in an executive director role before. And so I chose several women who were in my professional circles who I already was on close, we were friends, but we were also colleagues, who were also going through major career transitions and stepping up to new levels of accountability and responsibility and sort of being in the public eye. And we had a Slack group, and we called it our accountability group. And so at first we checked in once a week with each other, and particularly in spaces that are poorly defined, where there's lots of advice floating around. You can read a million different books about management or like leadership strategies or whatever. Getting your head wrapped around what's applicable to me, what do I really need to confront, and having people whose opinions you respect, but who you can show your struggles to. Because I often, we talk about like being a swan, where above water, you're just grace and poise, and then underwater, you're madly churning. at that point in my career, what I needed more than anything was someone to give me gut checks, to give me recommendations of strategies and tactics that supported them, and who wouldn't let me believe my own like spiel. Once I started getting really good at saying, I'm great, this is great, everything's great. And they would say like, no, what's really wrong? What are you struggling with? And then supporting in that way.
So I, agree with so much of what's been said by my fellow panelists here, and I also had several mentors along the way. It's not that there was one individual. I would add it's important to seek out, be assertive in seeking out mentors who you aren't obviously connected to already because, for example, they're your supervisor or in your immediate professional sphere, but maybe somebody that you encountered along the way at a conference or otherwise. Most of us, who are further along in our career, we are willing to play that role because so many played it for us as we were moving up. And there are very few who are going to turn you down. And if they turn you down, most often it's because they're, just so busy, obviously personalities. But for the most part, we're willing, especially as women, we're willing to mentor up and coming women. I've had to give a lot of thought to what mentorship means from the other side of the table because I've been in a management position for over a decade now with, staff who are at all different stages with different skill sets. And it's not easy to be a mentor either. And I think it's a two-way relationship where you need to be able to give feedback to your mentor about what you're getting and what you're not getting, what works for you, what doesn't work for you. That's part of building that relationship and getting the most out of it. And we learn as mentors too along the way, and we hone our skills in that role. So I think I'll probably leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I love the swan analogy. I've never heard that before, but it's so right. And yeah, I think sort of my takeaway when I was listening to some of you talk about fostering those relationships. Like my thought is like that's so brave, and that must be so hard. And I think a really valuable takeaway, at least for me, for this is gonna kind of reinforce that that's something that I have to like be brave and work on. So yeah, thank you very much for that. So pivoting a little bit. The next question is that many careers require you to be able to understand a variety of topics outside the constraints of your academic training, which is obviously very different than going deep into one topic the way that we've been trained to do. So I was wondering if you could speak to what it has been like to adjust to learning about a wider scope of science for your career.
Start this one off. So I was extremely interdisciplinary through my studies. I was engineering physics undergrad, so I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, except I loved physics, and then ended up being bioengineering for graduate school. So I was a little bit jack of all trades, master of one, none, but even by except bubbles, by PhD thesis. By the time I graduated, which actually and then I went to do a postdoc at NIH and get more into the biology. So that actually set me up really well to be the science and technology expert, which what does that mean to those of us who are scientists, because we're so narrowly trained. And yet I had vocabulary, across so many fields, and at least a decent understanding of the basics across so many fields. That really set me up really well for my current position. Having said that, I'm getting into fields all the time where I don't have a lot of comfort. And to be perfectly honest, like computer science, like I do a lot of cybersecurity, focused policy work. And that is one field that I still can't wrap my head around. I just fully admit I still can't wrap my head around and struggle with the technical side of it as I'm trying to think of the policy, but need to have some understanding of the technical to really be smart on the policy. So there's still areas I still struggle. But for the most part, I'm able to communicate with scientists and engineers across fields to understand the basics of the technical issues to be able to inform our policy thinking.
I remember for me, the kind of knowledge that I needed to capitalize on shifted from like explicit data that was best captured like in papers and in databases to more tacit or implicit knowledge, stuff that was relational. So Amanda said earlier, it's all about people. And I very clearly remember my brain sort of like struggling because I could always tell you the details of a paper that I'd liked. I loved, like, I would talk about the methods and how great it was. And I could usually maybe remember the lab it came out of, but the individual personalities kind of escaped me. And in the space that I work in now, understanding past histories and relationships, whether that's to deal with like interpersonal politics or relationships or like the founding of companies and like licensing and that kind of thing, I've had to shift my knowledge management practices. So I still have my Zotero library with all my PDFs, but I'm also I use Obsidian, it's text-based hyperlinked files to keep track of people, because understanding that social network and social capital is just as, if not more important than the scientific details for me now.
Oh my gosh, yes, Liz. It's so true. And I had this great aha moment at one point. I was talking to the former director of King County Metro, which is manages the transit system in my county and here in Seattle. And he said he used to hire people who could drive a bus. But at some point he made a big shift and realized he hired people who were good with people and he trained them how to drive a bus. And now that I'm in this position where we sit at the intersection of so many different disciplines of science, the environmental movement, the science of science communication, nonprofit leadership, like I don't have a natural affiliation home, and I'm always learning new things. And that is true for everybody in my organization. So when I'm hiring, I'm not necessarily looking for people with a deep knowledge and skill set in one particular subject area. I am looking for those people who have the things that you may not have gotten trained in grad school, right? The so-called soft skills, which are so not soft, they're hard, right? You know, emotional intelligence, cultural competency, relationship building, ability to network, think creatively, big picture thinkers, strategy. Like, this is what I'm looking for. And, you know, yes, it's great to have a subject area knowledge in one particular field, that's super useful, but looking for that flexibility and different styles of approaching the work, that's what's been key to this sort of non-academic career that I am now in.
I think the position I had just for my current one, when I was interviewing for that position, my would-be boss basically told me that he was looking for somebody who was able to quickly understand a lot of different topics. He wasn't necessarily looking for somebody who had deep knowledge in one particular topic. And it was because that particular position, my issue areas were very, very broad. And so he's like, you're gonna have to cover a lot of issue areas. So I want somebody who's able to look at some information, be able to like digest that information and get a quick understanding of it and move on. And so I think that's going back to one of those soft skill, hard skills sort of things, is being able to analyze information and digest a lot of information and communicate that out and spit that out into a way that, you know, is other people can consume it as well. And so that was very important for that particular position. And I think largely for other positions that I've had within the legislature, but it was just in that one because I was covering a lot of different issue areas, and that was specifically what they were looking for. And I think my analyzing skills and everything coming from academia and just from other positions was very valuable and translatable in that particular position.
I guess I'll finish the round. So I echo everything that everybody has said here. I think the common theme that ties all of that together is communication. That was super important. And I think that the most important skill that I carry forward with me even today that I learned in grad school was learning how to learn, because especially if you are like me, who had been in academia my whole life in some form of research and had never really had a real world job until I had my first real world job. It felt like I was in a bubble where, you know, everybody was like me. Everybody else was a PhD student, or everybody else was doing research. And even though the research differed, we still understood one common language, which was scientific theory and hypothesis testing and all of that, right? But suddenly you're, you know, in a business setting. And for me, my day looks very different. I have my calendar in front of me. It's like, you know, talking to super technical people, some who are actually PhDs, some who are engineers, you know, discussing their technical day-to-day work, but then at a very high level, being in hiring and discussing things with our talent acquisition team, or, you know, discussing at a very broad level, like with my stakeholders on how our work impacts what they do. And that means like abstracting it at a very high level to something completely non-technical, right? Even though it is very technical work. So I think it's like the main challenge is like, you know, stepping outside of that bubble, realizing that the whole world around you is not kind of more or less the same, and then being able to speak to them, knowing who your audience is, speaking to them about what they might care about, and really convince them to invest in you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I thought of this question because I was taking a developmental biology class, and my background is in biochemistry, and I'm in a neurodevelopment lab now. So it was kind of a rough adjustment. And then so when we got to the neurodevelopment unit, I was like, thank goodness I got this. And then I realized that I didn't know 90% of the more general information, even within what I thought was my field. So yeah, definitely learning, you know, to communicate and be able to grasp information quickly is something that I'm paying a lot more attention to now. Thank you.
And being able to find the confidence to acknowledge when you don't know something, to not be ashamed, to not feel like you're constantly on this defensive. I mean, sometimes we are, and it is important that we are prepared and we know our stuff, but finding ways that feel comfortable to you to probe can be a really valuable skill, because sometimes the people who are doing the talking also are not as clear as you might think that they are.
For sure. Okay, so this next question is an opportunity for you to brag about yourself a little bit and also inspire the audience members. What is your favorite accomplishment? So yeah, Liz, I know you spoke to this a little bit before about your dog, but maybe tailor it for the career aspect.
One of mine, which has a giant asterisk or caveat to it, but in my first year transitioning into science policy, so I was still a fellow. So my background in research is in drug abuse research. And I was in what was called, and I was placed as a fellow in what was called the Senate Office of Research. And so what that office did is it did a lot of background research for any state senators, or Senate committees that needed a deeper dive into whatever topic. And that came in sometimes it was in the result of reports or what have you. On occasion, the director of the Office for Fellows would allow fellows to write a report on their own, whatever they wanted, regardless if it was something that a senator requested. And so at the time, you know, e-cigarettes were still becoming sort of there weren't a lot of regulations on them. You know, there was a lot of misinformation on them. And so I wrote a report basically about the biology or the science behind e-cigarettes, and, you know, what is true about them, what isn't, the research, you know, that is behind it, and then tied it into policy on what's happening policy state level, on federal level, and everything. So it was this perfect merger between the science that was my academic background and what I knew and what people around me were not very aware of, and the policy part, which is what I was learning, what I was new to, but where now all of my peers and colleagues were professionals in. And it was just a very proud moment for me, for like, this is why I came here. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to blend the science and the policy into a digestible thing. And this is, you know, the the thing that I made. The caveat was that it was unfortunately never made public for various political reasons, but I still have pride in it that, you know, I created that piece.
So, you know, I've collected a few proud moments over 7 years, but I'll also back up to the very beginning of my career in policy when I was a congressional fellow in those first couple of years on the committee staff. I had the nuclear energy portfolio at the time, and this was under the George W. Bush administration, and they were proposing, the Department of Energy was proposing a massive scale up of nuclear energy research focused on closing the nuclear fuel cycle, so recycling and reprocessing recycling. They looked to Japan, they looked to France and said, hey, they're doing it, which was maybe a quarter true. We can do it too. And I worked, I was on the energy subcommittee. My subcommittee chair, who's long retired, she was from the state of Illinois, where 50% of electricity comes from nuclear, and she had Argonne National Lab, which does a lot of nuclear research in her district. So she was like really set up to, and it was, I didn't say this in the beginning, I worked for the Republican staff for the first couple of years. So this was on the Republican side of the aisle, or the Republican administration. So she was fully set up to like carry the water for them, be their biggest champion, because we had oversight legislative responsibility for these programs at the department. But here I come along as a new fellow, not necessarily knowing nuclear science in any depth, but knowing, you know, physics and chemistry, and having literally the periodic table taped up in my office. So I was trying to figure out all the what's all in the, you know, spent fuel, and what's all the different concerns with bioavailability and the long-term radioactivity and so on and so forth. And I was able to kind of pull away the smoke and mirrors of what the Department of Energy was trying to sell Congress, sell my chairwoman, and help translate for her where all the real concerns were that I was hearing from the scientists and experts out in the field, in the community, and helped support her in becoming one of the biggest, you know, vocal skeptics of the specific plans being proposed by the Bush administration at the time. We worked closely with the appropriators to put real restrictions on the funding and scope of their efforts. And she had to walk that line, like, I support you, but I have all these questions. And we had some hard-hitting hearings like that. And I think that's why I'm here 17 years later, right? I jumped in at the right moment with the right portfolio and had, you know, fairly significant influence, even as a newbie, not really knowing what I was doing, and realized how much potential there was for scientists, voices to be heard if we're in the right place at the right time in the policymaking process.
I'll jump in. So I'm relatively new in my career transition compared to some of us here. So imposter syndrome kicking in right away, right? But I guess I would say there isn't really a proud moment per se. I think that when I look back at how this career transition has been from where I started, 5 years ago, I never would have thought that I would be running a science and machine learning and engineering team at CNN of like close to 40 people. When, you know, just 3 years before that, I've now been at CNN for about 5 years, but 3 years before that, I had zero experience in management, zero experience running a team, and zero experience talking to C-level people at any company, let alone CNN. So that does make me look back and make myself proud.
All right. Oh, Liz, go for it.
Oh man, I thought I'd waited long enough. I think the short answer is like filing the paperwork to form the LLC and founding my own firm. I had spent my entire career making other people's dreams happen. And this was the first time that I could stand with security and certainty in my own vision and say, I know the case I want to make, what I want to do in the world, and how I'm going to do it. But to get there, I think the thing I'm proudest of when I look at the whole sweep of my career outside of academia is I was such a people pleaser and like a goody two shoes. I was the A+ girl who wanted to do everything by the book. Learning how to have productive conflict, how to the storms that can come along with having someone in a position of power over you, or like I had a junior male employee screaming at me on the phone as I was trying to deliver information from the board about what we were going to do during a pandemic. And finding resilience and security in myself, that I wasn't reliant on external approval. I'm never going to get any more awards. Those don't exist really in the space that I'm moving into. I don't need all of those measures that I used to consider critical for understanding if I was doing what I wanted to do and being the best. So I think that's what I'm most proud of.
Oh my gosh, these stories are all so wonderful. You all are amazing. So I think something that I'm most proud of is a program and a path that I got started on when I was at the Wilberforce Foundation, so still working in philanthropy. I collaborated with Compass to create a leadership program for conservation scientists called the Wilberforce Fellowship in Conservation Science. And we're going to be announcing our 3rd cohort of that program next week. So I'm super excited about. Liz was involved with this back in the first cohort in 2015. So small world here. But this was a program that combined Compass's expertise in working with scientists and doing communication training with what I had learned and through my organization on supporting leaders and leadership and thinking about how to develop effective theories of change, how to be leaders of change, how to become a leader, right? And that journey has led to now Compass is really growing and thriving in this area. We have 3 different leadership programs going right now, even during a pandemic. And we have just created and innovated in this space and are doing things that I feel like nobody else is. And it has such an impact on people. And I think on all of the work that we're trying to do as scientists, as environmentalists, I feel like investing in leaders is one of the most impactful things that we can do. And supporting that leadership in others is something that I personally find so rewarding. And so, connecting with these people who were fellows in 2015 and seeing where they're at and where their journeys have taken them. And the more that we do this, the more leaders and the circle, they just keep growing. And it's just a wonderful feeling to know that you've had so much impact in so many people's lives.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I think I'm going to get to the last question before we move on to the Q&A. I think this ties in a little bit with the question that was just entered there, and also with what Deepna said. So many of us here, as we, has been vocalized a bit, are, aware of what imposter syndrome feels like. I thought, like, once I was involved in undergraduate research, I wouldn't feel that way, or once I graduated, or once I was in a graduate program. And now I'm thinking it's once I get my degree, but I don't know. So my question is, in your experience, is imposter syndrome a feeling that is just totally normal and ebbs and flows without ever completely disappearing, or is there a moment that comes to mind where it clicked and you feel secure in your identity as a scientist?
I'll take that one. It really does ebb and flow. I think for me personally, it definitely makes fewer appearances now because, ever the scientist, right? There are just more data points now in my life. Like, before I thought in graduate school, it was, this one paper that I wrote, or maybe my mentor or the mentor that I was seeking just adopted me because he felt bad for me. Or, when I got my postdoc, it was just like, it was because of the mentors network that I got my postdoc. And then, getting into Insight, which was a 5% acceptance rate, and then landing my first job out of academia. Yeah, all of it, it just felt like it was pure coincidence or somebody's favor or somebody's luck. And I just happened to be there. But as time goes on and you have more and more data points, and every now and then, you have people around you that actually value what you're doing, give you that positive feedback, which I personally think in academia is really lacking. I see lots of people going, oh yeah. So I think that helps a lot. But it's still ebbs and flows, right? Because you'll always find reasons to make yourself believe that you could be doing better. You shouldn't be here. And it's not just, I see the question in the Q&A, so I'll just tie that as well. I've always been in a field that's been dominated by men, computational neuroscience, then data science, now machine learning engineering, and being in one of the executives at CNN. There's no females around me. I report into the CTO of CNN, and all of his direct reports that lead various teams under him are all men. And not to say that they're men, but they're also largely white males, and probably a decade older than me on average, I would say. So yeah, for all of those reasons, like, again, it comes and goes, but I think there are proof points that you get, success stories, because otherwise no one will pay you in the real world to just stick around.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'll keep it short. I think, just like you said, it ebbs and flows. And I think as time goes on, as you get that positive reinforcement, as you continue to succeed, it goes away a little bit. But I know with this latest position that I got, it was one of my first management positions my professional position itself was as management. And I really got like imposter syndrome for real for a while, because I was like, are they sure they wanted me? Did they really pick me for this? Can I do this job? But then I had to like talk and have an inner dialogue with myself and say, they picked me, they chose me. So they have already decided that I'm the one for this position. I need to get on board and also believe that I'm the one for this position, because nobody else is projecting this imposter syndrome onto me. It's coming internally. And so I really had to have just an internal conversation with myself and say, like, I'm here for a reason. Like, let's keep it moving. Let's do this job and prove to everybody that they put me in this position because they saw something in me and that I'm worthy for this position. And so once it was like that switch that said, like, it's on me to get over the imposter syndrome. And I just need to prove the worth to myself, because I've already proved it to the others that put me in this position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I wanted to say builds on both of those things too. I feel like sometimes you hear people throwing around this term imposter syndrome, and it covers so much territory. Like, it's not really a syndrome to feel anxious and alone if you're getting bombarded with implicit and explicit messages that you don't belong here or you're other, right? I think so. Those data points that we've been talking about a little bit more, like you accumulate experiences, you also build a portfolio of noticing other people's their behaviors, their repertoires, the things that when you see it the first time, it's shocking. Like, I remember I had only been in my role as executive director for a couple of months, and I was a keynote speaker at the American Society for Human Genetics. And I did a speed dating, like, meet and greet type thing. And someone was asking me, a hotshot scientist, grilling me about this new story collider thing that I was doing. And I know science is hierarchical, so that a way I could appeal to this person was be like, oh yeah, by the way, George Church told a story on our stage. And this man looked me dead in the face and he said, no, he didn't. And I said, yes, he did. He told this story, and I like described it, and I mentioned there was like a forest fire in it. And he's like, no, I'm sure you're wrong. And I had never met anyone who would do that in conversation before. And he was so certain that I thought, oh no, I'm not, not on top of my back archive. And then I realized, like, oh no, there's people who move through the world that way. And so now I don't question myself to the same degree because I recognize that there are different tactics and different styles.
Oh my gosh, yes. There was an article in HBR, Harvard Business Review, like a couple months ago, which has had like, it's been one of my many open tabs on my browser since it was published. And it's called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. I'll put the link in the chat. And it's so good. And I think, you know, I'm 48, I'm a nonprofit ED, you know, by all measures, successful in many ways. I've mostly gotten over the imposter syndrome thing, but I think, just as Liz is saying, it's like how much of this is our normal anxiety and insecurities, which everybody has, but they are sort of ramped up and exploited in toxic systems. And I think academia and science is one of those, right? Grad school was a place where, oh my God, you were just made to feel inadequate in every way, shape, or form every day. I think, you know, when we were mentioning feedback, right? It's like, how many times do you get positive feedback in an academic setting? You know, the guidance we get from management, from the business world is, you know, your direct reports should be hearing like 5 pieces of positive affirming feedback for every 1 bit of constructive or critical feedback. And that was not the ratio that I experienced in science. And so thinking about like, how do we create places and spaces where we can build each other up and use that normal sort of anxiety and insecurity as fuel for our fire to do hard and great things, but not to that, but take away that toxicity, that otherness, that not belonging, right? So that's something that I've been working really hard at Compass is, right, to build and model a different culture for science, for all the groups and spaces that we create. Can we create places where every scientist is safe and supported and bringing their whole selves to their work? That's what we like. We can't change all of academia in one fell swoop, but can we create places where we can thrive?
So I love what's already been said, and I'm noticing we don't have that much time left, so maybe I won't add to it except to just echo and say it does take many years and many successes to get to the point of real confidence, but that confidence can be limited too. You know, somebody came to me trying to recruit me into a wholly different kind of job, more something closer to Amanda's job about 5 years ago, and I thought, I can't do that, right? So it's a constant process throughout our careers, and we just have to keep working at it.
I really appreciate the rephrasing because you're right, like the wording of syndrome isn't at all accurate. It's not that there's something wired in us, it's that, you know, the environment is really pervasive. That, yeah, so I think that's really helpful. Well, yeah, so as Dr. Zavala mentioned, we are running a little short on time. Someone did ask a really interesting question in the Q&A, so maybe if one person wanted to address that, if we had time. I don't know if I'm pushing it, but the question is, in making professional decisions, grad school or not, finding your first job, there's a lot of uncertainty. Have you ever made a decision that you realized wasn't right for you, and what did you do? I think this is a really interesting question.
I can take that. So for me, while I was in grad school, I already pretty much had it set that I didn't want to stay in academia. As I was finishing up grad school, I really apologize for my toddler in the background. As I was finishing up grad school, you know, I was looking for positions and just wasn't finding the right thing. I came across one postdoc position that, you know, was along the same lines of research as what I was doing. My advisors knew the PI and was like, you know, she does great work, everything. This is the only postdoc I applied for. I got it, started that postdoc. And for various reasons, just, you know, it was really reinforcing that, no, I don't want to stay in academia. And it was very early along in that postdoc that I realized that. And so from there, I just did everything. I was like, I want to do science policy. I really love the science communication part of that. What things can I do to really enhance my portfolio, enhance my resume, so that when it comes time to apply for the next thing, which ended up, fast forward would be the California Council on Science and Technology Fellowship. I had all of those same things saying, this is what I've done, this is what I'm interested, this is my passion, and this is why you want me. And so it really lit the fire under my behind to just really go and do all those extra things to make sure that the next path was not just kind of continuing along with what I should be doing, but really devoted to what I want to be doing.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I really do, like, all of you and see, like, the peak of success. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, to share and, like, demystifying the journey a little bit of, what happens during STEM and after. I think this has been really comforting for a lot of us and really, really productive. Yeah, so I wanted to just wrap it up and thank everyone. I don't know if anyone had any last minute remarks that they wanted to make. Yeah, mostly just thank you so much for your time and your insight.
Go ahead.
I'll just say, I think it was addressed a little bit about sort of mentors and sponsorship of, how do you reach out? Does it feel like stressful to reach out to somebody? And don't feel stressful. Don't feel bad about asking for what you need. So if you want to reach out to me after this panel, if you've got a question or whatever, don't hesitate to reach out. I may not be able to give you everything you want or need, but I don't mind the ask. I never do. And I'll do my best to try to make it happen.
Yeah, same goes for me. I was just going to say, don't discount the power of networking with peers also. Just step outside of your comfort zone and do network as much as possible, whether it's academia that you pursue or an alternative career, as they still call it, outside of academia. So definitely don't be afraid to do that. And the second thing I'll say is that do question at every time, is this right for me? Because you have the right to do that. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in grad school was that I just kind of went with the wave, and I figured everything, even though I had doubts in my mind, I would just keep going and feel like everything will be okay in academia. So it's okay to question yourself and think outside the box because grad school is very much a box for a while.
Say, take up space. Tell your stories. You have earned it. You deserve it. Don't make yourself small or let other people make you feel small.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And yeah, I think that wraps it up.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks for having
everybody.
us.
Bye.